Today we're going to be talking about the 9 red flags that you should be keeping an eye out for if you should not be trying to get your ex back. Now, more often than not, every time you stop by my YouTube channel, you'll see me talk about exes and what it takes to get them back, or in some cases, what it takes to get over them. But very rarely do I talk about situations where you should not even be trying to get your ex back. And this is a little bit by design, because most of the people that come to us just want one thing. They want to figure out how to win their exes back. But one thing that we should be telling you is that not every situation should be one in which you try to get an ex back. Now, I've alluded to this briefly in my other videos when you hear me talk about the Ex Recovery Chances quiz. Now, if you don't already know, basically I put this quiz together on my website, www.exboyfriendrecovery.com. That's basically designed to tell you what kind of chance you have of getting your ex back. And it's taking all of these factors into account. And we're going to basically give you an approximate idea if you have a good chance, if you have an average chance, or if you have a really low chance. Now, all you have to do if you're interested in taking this quiz is simply look in the description link below this YouTube video and click on it. It's pretty simple. Okay, with that out of the way, let's talk about the 9 red flags that you should be keeping an eye out for if you are not going to be trying to get your ex back. Red flag number 1, intensity. Now, intensity is basically over-the-top behavior that feels like it's too much too soon, and your ex will have a history of doing this. Now, when I say intensity, what exactly does that look like? Well, I think a classic case of intensity in a relationship is if you just start dating your ex. Maybe you look back to the beginning of your relationship, you had just started dating them, and all of a sudden they're trying to do all of these things way too fast. In many cases, they'll start taking you ring shopping, or sometimes even talking about your kids' names or how you're gonna get married and you've been dating them for a week. This is a red flag because more often than not, it shows an insecure individual. Someone who is desperate will often also be someone who is unhinged when a breakup will occur. Red flag number 2, controlling. This is basically where your ex tells you what you should wear, where you should go, who you should see, who you should and shouldn't talk to. So controlling behavior, I see a lot in 2 groups of exes. Usually exes who are in their very first type of relationship, so that means you were their first everything and they don't really know how to handle relationships yet. And then also some of our older clients will tend to have men who are a little bit controlling. And this is usually because throughout their entire lives, this is the way they viewed relationships. Now, having an ex who is extremely controlling is extremely off-putting, and it's something that I would really pay attention to, because usually what I find is my clients will come to me and they'll try to make excuses for this type of behavior. They'll try to blame themselves about saying, well, you know, I was doing this wrong and he was just reacting to that. There's no excuse for someone who is overly controlling to the point where they're telling you what to wear, they're telling you who you should talk to, who you shouldn't talk to. That's not a good sign, and it is definitely a sign that you should not be trying to get your ex back. In other words, it's a red flag. Red flag number 3, extreme jealousy. This is when an ex becomes irrational anytime you talk to a member of the opposite sex. They may even accuse you of untrue things, like gaslighting. Now, I have been no stranger to the jealousy bug. You know, it happens to the best of us, but there is a difference between healthy jealousy and unhealthy jealousy. Healthy jealousy is, let's say you're in a very strong, committed relationship and you bring up to your partner, hey, you know, I didn't like that you were talking to that person. It made me feel uncomfortable. Notice how you're talking in a very calm manner and you're trying to work the problem out. Unhealthy jealousy is when you start gaslighting or your ex starts accusing you of things that haven't happened. They make this own scenario up in their mind and it just kind of goes out of control to the point where they're just accusing you of things that are simply not true. There's usually a spectrum when it comes to things like this. Some exes will be on an extreme end of the spectrum. Some exes will be on the other extreme end where they're really not jealous at all and you're thinking to yourself, what's wrong with them? But the key component I want you to understand here is that jealousy can be healthy in a relationship, but we're not talking about healthy type of jealousies. We're talking about extreme unhealthy amounts of jealousy, and usually you know the difference when you see it. Red flag number 4, isolation. This is where your ex intentionally monopolizes your time and insists that you only spend time with them and no one else. The goal here is to make you dependent on them. So I want you kind of to notice a theme with all of the red flags that we've talked about so far. Almost all of them involve controlling you in one way or another. They're jealous, so they usually gaslight you and make you feel like you're wrong for talking to someone else, even when it's completely innocent. This is just the most direct version of this, where they completely monopolize your time. You'll often find that this is a huge problem when you're talking to your family or your friends, and they're trying to keep you away from them. So they often make conversations last longer than possible to an extreme level. Now, we've all had relationships where we've been on the phone and we just can't seem to hang up with the other person, but it's different than that. We're not talking about this lovey-dovey conversation between two people. We're talking about a concerted effort on your ex's part to hold you away and make them completely reliant on you. I would even argue that they start trying to fix all of your problems so that you have to come to them before even seeking out or fixing problems yourself. This is a concerted effort to make you completely reliant on them because they need to feel they have that control over you. It's also a gigantic red flag. Red flag number 5, sabotage. This is basically where they make you choose them over your own dreams. So people like this are known to fake illness, threaten to end relationship, or even hide keys. Again, I want you to notice the common theme here. Control. Usually these big red flags really revolve around someone else trying to control someone else. Sabotage is just a way of doing that, because let's look at the last one where they're trying to monopolize your time. Well, one of the ways that someone would try to monopolize your time is by getting you to rely on them. And one of the best ways to do that is to sabotage any act of self-reliance that you have. So I gave a bunch of examples when I was explaining sabotage to you, and one of the first ones that we talked about there is faking illness. Now, I'm sure you've seen that show Catfish, where people fall in love online, even though they've never met the person or even seen the person through video chat or anything like that. And usually it's a catfish, someone trying to pretend they're someone they're not. One of the things that those people will do is they'll often fake illnesses. They'll say that they have cancer, and that's a reason why they can't meet up. Now, this has more, I think, to do with your ex's shortcomings, if they've done this to you, than your shortcomings for maybe falling for some cheap ploy like this. So it's important not to put the blame on yourself. It has more to do with their insecure, needy, unacceptable behavior. And if you are trying to get an ex back who has faked illness, who has hid keys from you and sabotaged all the friendships that you've had in your life with your friends, that's a gigantic red flag and someone you should probably not be trying to get back with. Red flag number 6, explosive anger. This is basically where your ex will overreact to small inconveniences in extreme ways. They'll lose emotional control or have gigantic violent outbursts causing you to fear them. Now, one thing I do want to make clear is that in relationships, fights will happen. And what's interesting in something that I've recently learned is that everyone has a different definition of what they view as a fight. For example, when my wife and I fight, I don't even view it as a fight. I view a fight as maybe huge yelling back and forth, but she can view a fight as a minor disagreement, where you're not really raising your voice, you're just saying, I don't believe this, and she's saying, I don't believe this, and she thinks that we're fighting. Now, what's interesting is that is kind of normal fights. What's not normal is extreme outbursts of anger to the point where someone's throwing things at you or harming you physically, and you become physically afraid, not necessarily for your life, but necessarily for your well-being. You'll know it when you have a conversation with your ex, right? And you know you're going to breach a topic that they are not going to respond very positively to, and you become afraid. That's the best way to test and see if their anger is kind of prone to violent outbursts. If you're literally afraid to tell them a piece of information, that's a problem. They should be able to handle and have emotional control, not to scream or physically harm you. So if you're trying to win someone back like this, we recommend not trying to win someone back like that. Cut them out of your life completely and move on. Red flag number 7, hiding an addiction. This is where someone will use an addiction as an excuse to be overly emotional. Either they make you feel sorry for them or they'll make you fear them and then blame you for their altered state. This is something that we've seen, unfortunately, a lot of ever since COVID happened. Why? Well, because lots of people are losing their jobs, and usually when they lose their jobs, they turn to alcohol and unfortunately sometimes drugs to numb the pain. And unfortunately, those things are extremely addictive. And what I want you to know is look at the common theme between almost all of these red flags. There's some form of control. So in my explanation for the addiction thing, it's not only that they're addicted to the substance that is the problem. They're addicted to the substance and blame you for it, a form of gaslighting. Now, I actually did a really interesting success story interview, one of my most recent ones a couple of weeks ago, where I talked to someone who successfully got their ex back, but because of COVID, he had a tendency to drink a little too much alcohol. Now, luckily, because she went through our program and she kind of found her self-worth, she realized I should not be with this person. And she ended up breaking up with him again after getting them back. I think this is a really good cautionary tale for someone who goes through our program and knowing that their ex has addiction problems, knowing that they can possibly win them back. It's kind of a look into the future to see what can typically happen. Usually, someone who has an addiction problem is only going to overcome that addiction problem by themselves. In other words, they need to make a conscious effort and conscious decision for themselves. It's not like you can come there and make it for them and fix the entire problem. That's why we don't recommend trying to get exes back with extreme addictions. Usually it doesn't end well even if you do get them back. And I know there's kind of this effort to want to fix the problem, to want to be the white shining knight there for your ex, but that's really not your job. Your job is to find the best person for you for your life. And someone with addiction issues usually isn't it. Red flag number 8, criticism. This is where an ex will intentionally make statements that make you feel unworthy and less than enough. Now, oftentimes you'll actually see this coupled with the explosive anger. Again, I want you to notice all forms of some type of control. And it's kind of weird if you think about it, because someone who's extremely angry at you will often find ways to hurt you in different ways because they almost want to drag you down with them. They want to make you feel the pain that they're feeling because, after all, misery does love company, right? And so they'll say very hurtful things, sometimes even untrue things that make you feel that you're unworthy or make you feel that you're not enough. And it's really hard sometimes for people who love this person more than anything they can think of at the moment to sort of separate fiction from reality. The reality is that what your ex thinks of you isn't reality. It's them usually trying to say something hurtful in an effort to bring you down. It is also kind of a form of control. It's their way of making themselves feel better because they can dominate another human being emotionally. Now, this is not a good candidate for trying to get back. In fact, I noticed that almost in all type of breakups, something like this has happened, especially if the breakup is contentious. Your ex usually says something like, "I never loved you," or "I never thought you were attractive." And it's usually very hurtful to the clients who come to me and they say, "Does he mean it?" And my response to that answer is usually yes, he actually does mean it in the moment. But usually their mind changes with a little bit of perspective. So it's also important to realize that this particular red flag is coupled with extreme bouts of emotion, but there is a difference between normal emotional outbursts and very hurtful, concerted efforts of emotional outbursts. I want you to realize that if you're in one of these situations where your ex is literally saying things that are awful to you, they're probably not worth getting back. And that's just the truth. Red flag number 9, blaming. This is where they intentionally make you feel guilty and they never take ownership. Everything's always your fault. Now, I saved absolutely the best for last. The best way to determine someone like this, with this red flag, is really that last statement. They never take ownership and everything is always your fault. And I think I see this a lot more with men than I do with women, though I have seen it with women who with the men I work with who are trying to get their ex-girlfriends back. So it's possible for both genders to completely exhibit this behavior, but I will say I see it more with men. And it's a really big pet peeve of mine because usually I think, I'm real big on self-reliance. I think sometimes one thing that the human race, one of the big flaws that we have is our inability to take ownership for problems. Oftentimes we want to make, especially when it comes to breakup, everything that was wrong with the relationship someone else's fault. And one of the smartest things you can do, even if you're sitting here trying to win your ex back, is sit back and start to take ownership for the aspects that you could do better on. Now, normally what I find is people who want to get their exes back, especially an ex who is very prone to some of these red flags, kind of don't look at it that way. They kind of allow their ex to gaslight them and allow their ex to make them believe everything is their fault. So one of the best things to do is with time and with perspective, you can look back on the relationship and actually kind of say, okay, maybe they've got a point here, but here, and here, that was all on them. That was their shortcomings. What are they talking about? Because when you're in the grind, when you're in the trenches and you're fighting and you're arguing, and you're going through a breakup, it's really hard to look at the situation and feel, okay, I've got a clear sense of everything going on. No, everything's muddy, everything's emotional. It's not really easy to figure some of that stuff out. And usually, not always in every case, I will say there's outliers to this, but usually, there's enough blame to go around for both parties. And if your ex isn't willing to take their share of the blame, that's not cool. That means that they haven't reflected and usually aren't a great candidate for getting back. Okie doke, welcome to the end of this video. We went through the 9 red flags in which you should not be trying to get your ex back. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, okay, well, is there a quicker way that I can kind of figure out if these situations will help me? The best thing I could do for you is actually just to tell you to take a look at the Ex Recovery Chances quiz that I referenced at the beginning of this video. All you have to do is simply look in the description link below this YouTube video and click on the link you see there. Also, if you haven't liked, commented, or subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do so. Contribute so that we can give back to you. I'll see you next time.